picture class are the ways on how human hosts get the infection. The number one in the mouth is the direct exposure of the human host to the urine of the contaminated animal host. So meaning if the urine from the rat has the organism Leptospira interrogans and human host has the direct exposure to that via that mucous membrane, then the organism will enter the body of the human host. Or the other number one class is in the lower extremity, which is being shown to you as a cut in the skin or breaks in the skin. Like what I said, if this particular human host steps on a stagnant water, steps on a flood water, and the flood or stagnant water is contaminated with the urine of an infected rat, that particular cut in the lower extremity or breaks in the skin of the human host can be a portal of entry for the organism to cause the infection. And it's an indirect way because it enters the human system from those breaks or cuts in the skin. Listen, when the organism enters the human body, the organism will immediately go to the blood circulation. The number 2 pointing in the heart would mean it will go to the blood and it will go systemic. At this time, listen here, at this time, the patient will manifest vague signs and symptoms which is very similar to dengue fever. There's fever, there can be rashes, there can be headache, there can be myalgia, or there can be abdominal pain. Now, since the incidence of leptospirosis is high during wet season, during rainy season, and that's also the time where incidence of dengue fever is reported at its highest, then that means leptospirosis infection usually is prematurely investigated as dengue fever because of the appearance of the vague signs and symptoms when the organism is in the bloodstream, when the organism is systemic. Now, when the organism is in the blood now, it causes systemic infection. It will give vague signs and symptoms. The doctor will usually treat the patient for dengue fever and not for leptospirosis. And so, when that particular treatment now is initiated, and it's actually a wrong route of treatment because it's a different type of infection, when the patient shows resistance to whatever treatment given to him because the doctor have already investigated and suspected the vague signs and symptoms to be dengue fever, at that time, when there is treatment to dengue fever, the organism resists all those treatments and the organism can actually go to the kidneys and it will affect the kidneys. It can go to the liver, it can affect the liver, or perhaps it can go to the central nervous system and affect the brain of the patient. That is why, listen here, that is why after the patient has been prescribed with treatments initially, and that's for dengue fever, by the time the patient or the doctor knows that why is the patient not showing a good prognosis of my treatment? At that time, the doctor would actually see now that this is not dengue fever, but this is another type of infection. At that time, the investigation now is quite late because it affected multiple organs already. And patient can die of multiple organ failure. That's why leptospirosis has to be investigated very well. History of the patient has to be taken into consideration because it will help in the suspicious or it will help in the investigation of the doctor if this is leptospirosis or another type of infection. Alright,